To celebrate a year of TellyCast, we've teamed up with Workshare Consulting to launch the TellyCast Workshare Content Industry Monitor. Taking the pulse of the global business of TV, this exclusive regular survey will analyse your views to find out how the TV business feels about the key issues it faces today. So, we're asking all of our listeners, from producers to financiers, from distributors to networks, and everyone in between, to please take a few minutes to fill out our survey. We're asking about how confident you feel about your job or business, how you've been impacted by the lockdown, both personally and professionally, how the industry leaders have performed, about virtual markets and events, and the return to a new normal working life and industry recovery. Just go to telecast-podcast.com/survey to complete it. It'll only take 10 minutes and you'll be helping take the temperature of the global TV industry right now. Plus, we'll send you a copy of the full results when we publish in April. Thanks a lot.
TellyCast, the TV industry news review.
How to get hired by Netflix. What's the latest on Andrew Neil's GB News and Rupert Murdoch's News UK channel launches? And what's next for Piers Morgan? Hi, I'm Justin Crosby and welcome to this week's TellyCast. On this week's show, my guests are former BBC North America and Europe editor Mark Mardell, media consultant and journalist Ian Burrell, Indigo talent MD Jude Thompson, and David Cornwall, managing director at Scorpion TV. It's all coming up on this week's TellyCast. There are two brand new news channels set to launch in the UK in the coming weeks, and here to discuss the country's TV news landscape and the effect these new players may have on it are Mark Mardell, formerly the BBC's North America and Europe editor and presenter of Radio 4's The World This Weekend, and Ian Burrell, media consultant and writer of the media column for the iPaper and the news business column for The Drum. He's also formerly assistant editor of The Independent and previously worked for the Sunday Times and ITV. Mark, Ian, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here.
Thanks, Justin.
Great to have you on. Ian, coming to you first, is there really a market for two new news channels in the UK?
Well, certainly the people putting the money into it think there's an opportunity. To me, this is post-Brexit television news. This sense that there's a whole audience out there that's being passed by the current incumbents in television news. And this has been building really since the referendum and all the years that we've lived through since then, this feeling that London-centric news is not reaching various parts of the country, that people are being left behind. That's certainly the feeling behind GB News in particular. They're looking to create diversity in the voices on their schedule and to reach parts of the country that they believe are currently underserved.
Mark, the BBC just announced last week there's a whole load of changes right across the corporation, but looking specifically at news, they're taking the Today programme to be co-presented from outside London from at least 100 episodes a year. They're moving the climate and science team out to Cardiff and technology to Glasgow. BBC's World Service business team has moved out to Salford. And there's going to be a new generation of 100 new reporters based in towns and areas that have never really had a regional TV presence. Do you think this is an admission that the BBC hasn't really been serving the UK population properly with news?
I think, as ever with the BBC, it's a bit of a curate's egg and a mixed bag, to mix my metaphors thoroughly muddled up. But I think that it's partly what Ian described, that post-Brexit landscape, the feeling that there's an audience who just doesn't feel served by the BBC. I'm not sure how right that is, how good their research is, but it's partly driven by that. Some of it's, as I say, very good. I think the 100 new reporters is a brilliant idea. If it really happens and they really put them in places and towns that have never been served before, fantastic. Because one of the problems I always had on the programme of The World at One was when the story happened, you'd ring up the newsroom and they'd say, sorry, it's just me reading the news. There's nobody here to go out and do it. And I'm talking about places like Liverpool saying that. So, that's brilliant. I think it's a good idea to get the Today programme on the road and other programmes. I'd like to think I'm a bit of a pioneer with that. We took The World at One and The World This Weekend on the road quite a lot. You have to be technically editorially quite focused on that. You can't just go there and then hope something will turn out. You have to look for a story that will work. We did it during Brexit, so it was always about Brexit and the area's attitude. So you've got to be focused. I think getting people out of London is probably a good idea, but it's more about a social strategy, an economic strategy that the government will endorse than anything that helps the BBC. I mean, I think being based in Cardiff or Glasgow rather than London maybe gives you a wider viewpoint, but that seems to be more the social engineering than actually trying to reflect the voice of the country.
Ian, you talked about this being driven by a sort of a post-Brexit kind of movement, if you like, or the BBC has been always known as, or certainly Andrew Neil recently talked about the BBC's news as being metropolitan and sort of centre-left. And these two new services, we're assuming they're going to be more on the centre-right or more right-wing facing. People have talked about Fox News as a bit of a template for this. Can you talk us through these two new services and what we know so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's certainly the case with GB News. You only have to look at the hires that they've made, which is the most interesting signal so far of the type of service they're putting together. There are three individuals who've got strong connections with the Brexit Party or Reform UK, as it's now known. Michelle Dewberry, Alexandra Phillips, also Inaya Folarin Aman have all stood for the Brexit Party. On top of that, you have Christian Mitchell, who's the LBC producer for Nigel Farage, at least for as long as Nigel Farage was with LBC. And then I read very recently Gawain Towler, who's the former Brexit Party comms chief, writing very favourably about GB News and saying they should go the whole hog and give Nigel Farage a presenting slot himself. So there's a strong alignment there, and that's why I would say that this is a service that's looking to reach the so-called 52%, those people who voted for Brexit. There's a strong political alignment there. With the News UK offering, I think it's different. I don't think it's so clearly a right-wing product. And it does describe itself as a product rather than as a channel. It's going to be individual programs that sit on connected TV rather than the 24-hour news channel that we've been used to. And it's going to really advocate and market for the existing brands in the News UK, Rupert Murdoch's newspaper stable. So it will build on the brand recognition that The Sun, The Times, and also Talk Radio already have. And this play is very much about News UK realising that it can't just be a newspaper legacy media organisation. It has to be multimedia. It's already moved into the radio sphere with Talk Radio and Times Radio. And this is an extension of that. It's a cross-marketing, cross-promotion of some of its best-known figures from those news brands. So the Times is obviously rather different in outlook from a Brexit leave type position. There are differences in terms of the political leanings of those two organisations, quite distinct.
Taking GB News to begin with, obviously, chairman is Andrew Neil, a hugely successful career in news, basically being editor of the Sunday Times and lots of various newspapers over the years, but also, helming some very successful political shows and actually being probably the most effective political interviewer, certainly over the last election and over the last few years. It seems to me to have all of the right ingredients to succeed. Mark, what do you think? What do you make of GB News?
Well, I would agree with you to start off about Andrew Neil. I work with him very closely on This Week. I think he's a brilliant interviewer, a brilliant presenter, very badly treated by the BBC and stupidly treated, because if they're worried about how they appeal to a certain audience, he was the man to do the job. And as you say, he's the best interviewer they've got. And I think it was crazy to throw him away. And I've got a lot of respect for him. But I'm concerned, interested indeed, fascinated by what GB News turns out to be, because it's all very well saying it looks Brexity, it looks leavish. Well, we've left. I know there's a lot of mileage left in Brexit, and it's a process, not a thing that happens, but you can't bang on about Brexit the whole time. They say they want to serve a marginalised and overlooked community, an underserved and unheard community. Do they really mean that, or do they just mean the people who voted Conservative in the last election in those new red wall seats? Is it just about that? Is it wider than that? Because Andrew Neil says it's not going to be Fox News, it's not going to be fake news, it's not going to be ranting. But it seems to me one of the things that's running through it is anti-woke. Now, woke is obviously the heir to political correctness gone mad, as in they won't even let you own human beings as slaves anymore. It's political correctness gone mad. And how much mileage can you get out of being anti-woke without becoming homophobic, without becoming racist, without becoming a lot of other things that people will find distasteful, or at least are on the margins of Fox News type ranting? And I'm not sure. I mean, it's all very well talking about statues for a bit and going on about people being banned and non-platformed, but how much mileage is that? I mean, they're going to be doing, I think if my maths is right, 270 days broadcasting a year or the equivalent thereof. You can't just go on about Coulson statue the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Ian? I mean, do you think out of the two, I mean, you mentioned earlier on that there are two very different offers, and we'll come on to talk about News UK's offer a bit more in a second. But I mean, in terms of funding, it seems to be very well funded. We've got a Discovery. There's also Dubai Group that are funding this, as well as other individuals. It seems to have, from what I've read, around £60 million of initial funding, and they've launched a recruitment drive for about 140 jobs, including 120 journalists, which is actually amazing. Over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a huge drive into journalism for both BBC and GB News, which is obviously great news and something that is much needed.
Well, it depends on the metrics you use to judge its success. I think Mark's absolutely right that Andrew Neil, who's the flagship host, is a huge asset to the project. But 60 million, I mean, it sounds a lot at first, but news channels, particularly the type of ambitious schedule that GB News is talking about putting together, they're extremely expensive things to run, and they don't traditionally make money. Sky News hasn't made money. Most people would consider that to be a success over the years, including Andrew Neil, who was there at the beginning. But it's not a financial success in that respect. You have to consider how we judge this. There's not a huge audience for rolling news. It's a pretty minority interest, and most media analysts struggle to see the business case for this, and the idea that advertisers will be queuing up to spend money with a service like this, particularly if, as Mark suggested, they veer towards some pretty sort of hostile stuff, particularly if they need to keep the ratings up, which offends people and leads to criticism and backlash. It's not quite as an easy one to pull off as I think you suggest, or might seem in these early days when it's all good news as far as they're concerned, because they're bringing on new people, they're hiring in a market where there's a lot of cuts and recession, and it seems like they're going forward. I think that because of the types of backers they have, it's not all about making money. Paul Marshall, who's the big hedge funder, who also underwrites Unheard, which is another anti-woke news outlet that is involved in the culture wars that Mark was describing. He's one of the big backers. The Legatum Foundation in Dubai is also putting in a lot of money. I'm not sure that the idea that they're going to make a huge amount of profits is the motivation. I think it's about changing the narrative in television news, providing something different, and all that comes with that.
Absolutely. I think it's intended as a wedge against the BBC. It's trying to force open the scale of political intervention from the television broadcasters and just push the envelope a little bit, or quite a lot, I imagine. And I think it is more political than about making money. I, of course, welcome the new journalistic jobs. I wonder what they're going to be, whether it's just going to be production staff, or whether they are actually going to employ reporters to talk to the people who are underserved and underheard. You mentioned rolling news. I think Andrew Neil has said it won't be conventional rolling news, so it'll be sort of discussion panel shows, I imagine. I don't know. We don't quite know yet. But I think it's very difficult to fulfill their remit of actually talking for people who are underserved and underheard. And if they don't just mean people who say, we don't never talk about immigration when we're in to talk about nothing else. If they really mean there's an underserved audience, particularly in the north of England, then you have to have people out there reporting, just looking for those stories, hearing those stories.
It's 6,500 hours a year of original news, opinion and debate. But I guess we talked about Fox News as a model for this in the US in terms of personality-driven channel. They've hired, surprisingly, actually, they've hired Dan Wootton, haven't they, from News UK? And you would imagine Dan Wootton would be the jewel in the crown, or one of the jewels in the crown for the News UK offering, Ian.
Yeah, that was a bit of a poach, and I think that adds an interesting dimension to this whole mix. So you have Dan Wootton, who people associate with News UK, on one side of the fence for GB News, and the first announcement, talent-wise, from News UK was Gordon Smart with an offering called News to Me, which is another celebrity entertainment type format rather than the more traditional news offerings that we were expecting. This extra dimension, it all helps, I think, GB News in saying we're a broader proposition than having just a single political agenda. That will all help with Ofcom and the way that it sees the outlet. I don't think Ofcom will be looking to shut this down, as some of the critics are already asking it to do before it's even launched. Ofcom has a brief to encourage plurality of voices, and it very rarely steps in to close any service down. The phrase it uses is due impartiality, which is quite broad. I think having Dan Wootton there, having some of the other very well-respected journalists that they've taken on board, like Colin Brazier, Darren McCaffrey, very established Sky News figures, will offset some of the more sort of louder political voices that they've taken on board, and probably help with the regulator, I would have thought.
We've seen Ofcom bare its teeth fairly recently, haven't we, with CGTN, the Chinese news channel?
They did, but that was really because CGTN failed to separate their ownership from the Communist Party of China, and only after very long negotiations and with some reluctance did Ofcom have to sever that license relationship. I think they were given every opportunity to remain on air. You only have to look at RT, Russia Today, the Kremlin supported Russian international news network, to see that they're still broadcasting in the UK despite having committed serious breaches of the Ofcom code, as indeed CGTN did. But CGTN lost their license because they weren't able to show that they were distinct from the Communist Party of China, and that is forbidden under Ofcom rules. You can't be run by a political party by law.
We talked about the investors, including Discovery. And Ian, you mentioned that you didn't think it was necessarily a money-making exercise. Looking at news channels, you mentioned Russia Today, we mentioned CGTN. These are channels really about soft power, aren't they? They're really about idealism and of the backers. Mark, so do you feel that this is really that, we talked about anti-woke agenda, and that's actually Woke Watch is one of the things that GB News, one of the sections that it's going to have as a regular feature on the show. Do you think that the channel is looking to sort of push the BBC aside in terms of from its political standpoint and being a centre-left broadcaster?
I think it's not so much trying to push the BBC aside as challenge it and paint it as centre-left, which Andrew Neil quite clearly does. I'm not sure that's true anymore. I mean, the idea that The Guardian is the only thing that gets discussed in editorial meetings is completely untrue. I think the Daily Mail gets a much bigger look in. So I think the idea is rather old-fashioned that the BBC is purely centre-left. But I think what it's trying to do is widen the media landscape in Britain so that there is space for political comment. I'm slightly torn in the sense that I'm excited by GB News. I think it's interesting. I think any new venture I really want to see succeed, and I'll be delighted to see how it pans out. But I am worried about broadcasting generally becoming an echo chamber. I mean, just as social media does, because in social media you choose who to follow. But in broadcasting, what happened in the States is deadly, I think. I think it's one of the reasons that American democracy is in danger, is because you only watch what backs up your prejudices. You never hear anything that challenges your own view. And I think that's really dangerous. And I think it'd be a great shame to lose that in Britain. I think Tim Davie, with his stress on the need for impartiality, is trying to fight that and saying, we're not going to have a go at these other broadcasters per se. We're not going to say that they're wrong, but we are going to set the gold standard for being impartial. Now, we all know in our own struggles with journalism that it's not something you actually can achieve impartiality, but it is worth trying, I think. And I hope the BBC carries on doing that. And it does worry me if people do start going into their little ghettos and only hearing views they applaud rather than those that annoy them as well.
We spoke about that when you were last on the show, Mark. We talked about Trump and the various other right-wing news networks that were vying for his signature back in November or December after the election. We've just seen recently there's rumours about him launching his own social media network, which is it's kind of frightening, I think. But to your point, if you're tuning into a channel because it's going to offer you news and opinion from a viewpoint that you're seeking as opposed to impartial news, that's us just supply and demand, isn't it, Ian? I mean, that's it's fair enough. In the same way that you pick up a newspaper, you either pick up the Daily Mirror or you pick up the Guardian or you pick up whatever other newspaper because of its political leanings, and you feel more comfortable with. Isn't that just what GB News is doing?
Well, they would say that, but television news in the UK hasn't been like that traditionally, and some would say that's its beauty, that it has very high levels of trust, higher levels of trust than the newspapers enjoy, because it treads a careful line of impartiality. And what we're seeing here, you could say, is potentially an Americanization of our television news. The model for GB News, not just in terms of pure output, but in terms of format, is the American model. So the types of programming that Fox News, but also MSNBC puts together, those kind of studio discussion shows. And we're also seeing this Americanization play out in other areas of broadcast. So LBC, I think, has been an encouragement to these new TV players, in that they've been able to give platforms to people with very strong opinions who maybe wouldn't have been able to get onto the BBC, who've been balanced under this due impartiality, one against another. So you've had the likes of Nigel Farage on LBC. Possibly James O'Brien would be seen to be a counterbalance to that from the left of centre. And that's been a big encouragement. And now we're seeing it also with Piers Morgan and what he's done at Good Morning Britain up until his rather dramatic departure from there. He's taken some of the lessons he learned in the US and brought this very opinionated style that we've just not been used to up until now. So I think this is potentially it's a tipping point. And I think Mark used the expression pushing at the envelope. That's what we're seeing here. And to come back to the point of the BBC, it could be that if the BBC is nudged a bit to the right, then some of the political supporters of these new ventures will consider that part of their success metrics as well. They'll consider that this was all worthwhile if they've changed the balance of the debate.
You mention Piers Morgan, and he's presumably the spectre that is casting a shadow over both of these services, I think, because the question is, where's he going to go next? This is, as you say, a presenter that has not only taken his cues from American TV, but obviously he spent quite a lot of time on American TV at CNN with his own show. He's also comes to any channel with nearly 8 million Twitter followers. So he's actually, a hugely influential hire. Where's he going to go? I mean, we know that Rupert Murdoch is a big admirer of his, and he's worked for him many times in the past. But presumably he won't be content with just being on a connected TVs. He'll want to be the star of a channel himself. I mean, what are you thinking? Where's your money going? Where's he going to land?
He'll have plenty of offers, that's for sure. And both of those new ventures would want to have him on board. The News UK team has his former producer, Winnie Dunbar-Nelson, on their top team already. She was his producer at CNN, also at Good Morning Britain. So that's a very strong connection. If they can put together the kind of package that gives him opportunities across different media, then Rupert Murdoch has plenty of money. He's not necessarily put a great deal of money into this project so far, but he is awash with cash. If they make the right opportunity for him, that could be very attractive. At the same time, GB News is very much suited to him. He produced a book last year, Woke Up. I mean, it's all about attacking woke culture. He's made that his big signature at GMB and in his attacks on Meghan Markle. He's a personal friend of Andrew Neil, and Andrew Neil's already said he would love to have him on board. You saw with the kind of Dan Wootton offering, where Dan Wootton's come to GB News, but also taken on a new journalism position with the Mail on Sunday. You're seeing the way that packages could be potentially put together for Piers Morgan. He will also potentially have other offers. Some of the streamers might put something together. He might be interested in what Jeremy Clarkson has done with Amazon. He already has a bit of a presence on Netflix with a series there about women in prison. He is a rare character, hated by many, but nonetheless able to draw big audiences and bring audiences with him in a way that very few people can.
Mark, what do you make of Piers Morgan and his ability to obviously to offend and upset, but also, he's been very successful in holding the government to account. Many would say during the pandemic, he's been the one challenging voice to the government. I mean, can you just see this getting bigger and bigger in terms of personality-led news?
Yes, I think so, definitely. I think personality news is a future. I say a future because I don't think it's necessarily the future and not necessarily the way the BBC will want to go. But it's, what a showman, what a great success, what a huge success. And as you say, I mean, there's one bit of me that despises him for that, and the way that you want to, not so much it's that you want to watch him, but you read about him constantly. And it seems the whole Meghan storm out was deliberate to me, was designed to provoke headlines and to make him bigger than the story. But he has been a great success, as you say, holding the government to account, doing tough interviews, which I think increasingly we don't see very much on the BBC. I think that we're getting into a phase where the BBC is worried about offending the government on occasions and doesn't give very strong grillings in many cases. Paxman was, who I worked with for a long time as well, was a huge success at that, of being not necessarily opinionated, but just asking the tough questions again and again. And Piers Morgan clearly does that. And, that's again where I've seen him tweeted around again and again when he's put the government ministers on the spot. And I think that's great to see that. And I would like to see that if I was saying that the BBC is being nudged in a certain direction by these news channels. That would be great if it was nudged into a tougher approach to government. Because it's quite interesting that both Andrew Neil and Piers Morgan have, to an extent, a sort of, well, Piers Morgan flits across, but a right-wing persona. But nevertheless, they're still quite tough on this Tory government. I think he's also, just an aside, he's sort of he fits in with the Trump and the Boris mold, doesn't he? He's a populist character, middle-aged white man, but, sort of somebody who's larger than life and says what he thinks others won't say.
There must be a question as to how much he appeals to the millennial audience, though, which is, if you're going for advertisers, that they're the holy grail. That kind of grumpy middle-aged guy approach is not necessarily going to play that well with them. I think with GB News, if they could afford him, another thing that they might find difficult with Piers Morgan is whether he would overshadow the whole brand. He's such a big personality. At the moment, their big name is Andrew Neil, and they draw a lot of kudos from that. If it becomes the Piers Morgan channel, that might be something different from what they set out to do, particularly as Mark was saying, he is a bit of a maverick. He led the Mirror against the Gulf War. He took on the gun lobby in the United States. He's challenged the UK government over its handling of COVID. And yet on other things, he's very anti-woke, pro-royal family, much more sort of traditionally right-wing. He's a difficult one to call, and such a big name that he could become sort of all dominant on the channel. So it'd be a difficult one for them to manage, I think.
Where's Jeremy Paxman these days? I mean, we miss him.
I miss him a lot. I think he pops up on Channel 4 documentaries from time to time. I think he's got a podcast, which I haven't shamefully listened to yet, interviewing the great and the good.
Yeah, he has a podcast which is based on having a drink with people in the pub and shooting the breeze, which is obviously not especially well timed in an era of a lockdown, which is rather unfortunate for him.
He's been waiting in the pub for the last year.
Yeah, you can see he'd be very attractive to either a product from News UK or the schedule at GB News. I read an interview with him last week that he did with Press Gazette, where he not only ruled himself out from having had any talks with GB News, but rather indicated that he was completely out the loop by saying he never watches Newsnight anymore, hasn't watched it for years, and claiming not to recognise quite a lot of what's going on at the moment. So I don't think he's looking for a gig with either of these operators anytime soon.
Well, he's a man after my own heart, because that's what I based TellyCast on when I started it last year, was the idea of sitting with TV people in a bar shooting the breeze. So maybe we should get him on next week, and or invite him on in a future week, see how it's going. And yeah, he sounds like he's chilling out. He's had enough of the whole aggressive interviewing, and he's probably just taking it easy.
He's always had that rather world-weary style about him.
He's done the Edinburgh Festival as well, hasn't he? So he's got a few strings to his bow.
Yeah. Mark, Ian, fantastic for you to join me this week. I've been really enjoying our discussion. We could talk a lot. We could talk probably a lot more about News UK, but there's a little less has been announced on that. So maybe we can look at that again in the future sometime. Thanks so much for joining me on this week's show. Really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thanks very much.
It's been a pleasure.
How do you get headhunted by a Netflix or a Disney? How does a headhunter operate? And what's the market like right now for senior executive TV hires? Well, here to tell us all of this and more about the secrets of the TV industry headhunter, I'm joined by Jude Thompson, MD and founder of leading TV industry talent recruitment business, Indigo Talent. Hi, Jude. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
This is a really interesting subject that I've been really interested in talking about for a number of weeks. So I'm delighted to have someone as experienced as yourself to guide us through this and talk us through the world of the headhunter. But first of all, you've got testimonials on your website from Ben Frau, Wayne Garvey, Lorraine Hegacy, Sam Barcroft, and lots of others. Tell us more about what you do and who you do it for.
We are a bespoke and boutique headhunting company, which means we're small. There's only 5 of us, and we intentionally keep it very tight. We work specifically within the TV industry, SVOD industry, and 2 divisions, scripted and unscripted. And clients, as you've seen on the website, offer range from people like Fremantle to Sony to Sky to smaller clients like various artists, 50 Fathoms, Lightbox. We work with exceptional storytellers and creatives. I'm really proud to do that.
What's the background to the company? Did you work in TV, or does other execs within the business work in the TV industry? How did you come to be a specialist headhunter in this area?
We're a diverse crew, actually. There's 2 of our team specifically came from production and talent management. I came through the executive search world, so I've been doing this for 20 years. Not many benefits of getting older, but one of them is experience and confidence. And I guess the other is I've worked with candidates 15, 20 years ago, so now they are in senior leadership roles. Who else? We've got Claudia, who's my business partner, came from radio. Sunrise, who's just joined us in Glasgow. She came from gaming. So yeah, a real mix. And I think it brings a different edge and a different opinion onto the market and the people we evaluate and identify.
So I've always wondered, and I'm sure lots of other people have wondered out there, how does a headhunter operate? Because, this is, everybody wants to get headhunted, don't they? We know that headhunters are out there, but you're, as you say, you may be a bit of a stealth business. Tell us about how you operate.
That's right. And in fact, somebody called us a private investigator the other day because we really are behind the scenes. There's a lot of senior roles and hiring that we're involved in, but you're not going to hear that from us. And I think that's our place. We hold so much information and intel. Confidence and trust is our number one value, and we will always retain that information, using it to help us shape our searches and decisions, but never ever sharing anything. So we are constantly in the market. If you think about how many people we're talking to, how many people we're listening to, what we're learning, and that's how we build our intel and information. So in terms of how you get headhunted, I guess the majority of our work is word of mouth, recommendations is a big part. Every time we talk to somebody, we always ask questions about who they've worked with, where has been their sweet spot in terms of being in the development team, where something really worked. So there's all questions like that we dig down to, who's been inspiring, who have they learned from. And then on the other side of the fence, we're complete super geeks. And I will sit there with a spreadsheet monthly going through all the programming index, who's been commissioning, what the ratings were, what's been recommissioned, why has that been recommissioned, and who was really behind the show. That's an interesting one. There's quite often specific shows that at least a dozen people are claiming to have created. So that's when it's like, okay, who really did that? And for example, if you're ever interviewing a creative or a development person who claims that was entirely their idea, that's generally a big porky because development's collaborative. There's always elements that somebody added. So we investigate a lot. We get really down to who was really behind the show. Claudia always describes it as this huge jigsaw, and we're forever putting the parts together. So headhunting is about, at the end of the day, doing amazing work, doing great work, being really talented at what you do, because that's how people talk about you, or that's how people recommend you. And I think that's really how it works. And also, we follow people. We follow people's careers. We look at the talent coming up, who's the next layer below the people we're working with, and we help them. We coach them. We're there as a sounding board when they're just deciding which role to go to next. And then once they're at a certain level, they come into our sphere and we can start, exploring who they're going to work best with, which culture, in order for them to flourish. I think, at the heart of what we do is we try and get, as Jim Collins used to say, you get the right people on the right bus in the right seats and then you go in the right direction. And it's, where are people going to do their really best work? Where are they going to flourish, and what's going to work for the clients?
Presumably, an executive has to wait for you to get in touch with them because you're out there watching their careers. And as you say, success as many fathers, if you like. I think this is the term when you look at a show and lots of people claiming their creators Strictly Come Dancing or whatever. In terms of an executive looking to move up the ladder, well, everybody does. Should they get in touch with you, or are they waiting for you to get in touch with them to do your research and waiting for the call, for the email from you?
I mean, it works both ways. I would anticipate we've probably been in touch with most people who are in permanent roles, by the way. Headhunters tend to work at a permanent level, whereas a lot of talent managers and there's sort of some recruitment agencies who are really good in the market, and they will look more at freelance execs. So it's a different type of role. If we're asked for freelance, if we know anybody who just, is in between roles or looking for some work, we're always happy to share names. But in general, we're always open for people to contact us. I guess the challenge is, in some aspects, if somebody's proactively looking for a role, we're not going to be the best people because we're working on either specific briefs or we're looking at people who will be considering what next after they've delivered certain things at their current companies. So, for example, there's a couple of people we're working with at the moment who are outstanding creatives, and they've probably got another 6 months at least where they are, either because of an earn-out or because that's, they're delivering a significant show. In fact, one of them's got a year left on something, but we're already starting meetings and exploring where they would be going next, whether that's another client, whether it's setting up a label. We put investment behind labels as well. We're doing M&A activity for US clients, anything to do with creatives at the heart of it. That's where we fit.
Back in my day, we used to have a paper CV, and there was books on how a perfect CV should appear. Now, obviously, we've got LinkedIn and we've got other social networks where people have profiles. Does CVs matter anymore? I mean, I'm sure they do, but what are the key indicators that you're looking for in people's social profiles, and how should people manage their social profiles?
Great question. And you need to get more of a social expert on that, because I'd say more, coming up the line, more junior roles, definitely talent managers and HR check out social profiles. So you need to be mindful of what you share. In our role, we tend not to look at we don't look at any socials. I'd say in-house recruiters. So some of the big studios, for example, have in-house recruiters that they use for all of their roles. And as do the SVODs, Netflix have a really strong talent team, and they will look at LinkedIn. So I would say to anyone proactively looking for a role, keep your LinkedIn profile really updated with a strong profile, a good professional photo. I mean, there's great tips on LinkedIn to go into, but we never use that information. I think talent-based and people like that will always have CVs, so that document does come important. When we're sharing information, when we're effectively shortlisting, which means to the client we're sharing which candidates should be taken to the next stage and interviewed for the specific brief, then we use CVs. And what people are most interested in is where they've worked, obviously, who they've worked to, and what their credits are. So what shows, somebody will always scan immediately what shows have they worked on.
What's the market like right now for permanent roles? Because we've obviously come through, when we're recording this, it's the anniversary of a year in lockdown in the UK. Very unusual patterns in terms of the way that the business has run in terms of the content industry. What's the market for permanent roles right now?
I'd say, just take it a step back. What happened this time last year then, after that 3 weeks of complete blind panic, all the global roles that we were doing, the global leadership roles, they all went on hold, which was absolutely right, because people in those positions needed to navigate their existing companies through whatever was happening. And also senior leadership here, in the UK, they were obviously all focused on effectively production and keeping their people safe. So recruitment took a back seat at that stage. So, we did have a sort of a big pause, which is quite right. And then there was also a fear factor of people not wanting to move roles during this time, because again, it was like, well, what happens? I'm on furlough, I'm not on furlough. So there was, as you'd imagine, there's quite a bit of anxiety.
Yeah. As
of before Christmas, everything came back. So all the global roles are back on. We, as a business, remember we're a small business and we only take on a certain number of searches so that we can do them all very well. But we're at capacity in both scripted and non-scripted. So we won't take any new searches on until May. So right. I guess that gives a snapshot that things are moving. It's positive. I've talked to other headhunters. They're in a similar position. And that's another thing, by the way, I'm just going to crop back to that. So headhunters all tend to have their own relationships with clients. So somebody will work with that client, will work with somebody else. So anyone who wants to get on the radar of headhunters needs to sort of connect with all the bigger players to flag themselves up. I'd suggest that, especially if you're proactively looking for a role.
We saw over the last week in the UK, the BBC announced lots of its departments are starting to move out to the nations and regions, and Channel 4 is obviously already committed and indeed opened its offices in lots of places around the UK. How's that going to affect executive recruitment in the next couple of years? Because coming from Yorkshire, and I know, Jude, you are too, yeah. I mean, when it comes to the senior executive who lives in Queen's Park might not be quite as keen to move up to Newcastle or Glasgow or Leeds. Presumably that's going to offer loads of new opportunities to people regionally as well. And actually what happens to the execs that are left in London, because they're going to be looking for other roles solely in London as well.
So it's such an interesting time. 2 years ago, we were doing a lot of work in Glasgow. And we've put some brilliant people up there, but it was a lot harder work. And for example, at the moment, we are doing quite a few searches in Bristol, and it's a lot easier to talk to people about moving out of London. Obviously, that's an impact of COVID, having more space. People really reflecting on lifestyle and how they want to be spending their time. I think the remote working has really impacted how people will live. It's going to be much more acceptable now to have 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, and have a slightly longer commute. That's going to be doable. And I think it's really positive for the regions. We're seeing a lot of people, the Geordies. Having said that, I couldn't even think of any Indies who were up in Newcastle, which I thought was extraordinary, such a creative bunch. But Geordies, a lot of Northerners end up going home, as I'd like to say, going back to their roots. And so that's fantastic. I know, quite a few people already who are looking at a northern move. So that's taking this creative talent out of London and up to building talent bases in the regions, which will take a little bit of time, but I think it's hugely positive. And also, London has been the epicenter for the creative world. I moved out of London 5 years ago to Brighton, and feeling quite pleased with myself about that during COVID. But I have to say, I'm from Middlesbrough originally, but moving out of London, you realise what a bubble London is. My husband, they're in the pub or watching telly by 6 o'clock. We haven't even left the office, and I thought that was a really interesting insight for TV world to think about the impacts of, creating content outside the London bubble. But positive for the regions, great talent up there, and I think by creating those hubs and talent bases, it's just going to provide way more opportunity, for more voices, for more regional voices. Brilliant. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, me too. And I think, this is all part of this leveling up that we've been talking about that totally. Hopefully really comes through on the back of rebuilding after COVID. But now looking at the US streaming businesses who have come and parked their tanks on the lawn of the UK TV industry over the last few years. And I'm hearing whispers from the freelance world that, new productions that are in place now, freelance execs are going to the highest bidder, i.e. the likes of Netflix, and they're paying almost 3 times as much for an exec for a week in production just because they're desperate to get production moving again. and it's kind of, price isn't an object for them. But it's in terms of the permanent roles, are we seeing that similar effect when it comes to US streaming businesses distorting the market with high salaries for UK broadcasters and other UK content businesses?
Good question. They do pay more, it's a fact. And I think it'll be more challenging potentially for people when they've been in a streamer to then come out and might have to take the shout that they're going to need to take a pay cut if they want a specific role somewhere else. So we're doing some global searches at the moment, and the US salaries have always been considerably higher than European salaries. So perhaps that's just what happened with the streamers. It's a really tricky one because, you asked at the beginning about, how do you get headhunted for a streamer? People ask us all the time about that. People all want to be working in that SVOD world, and they've got bigger budgets to play with. It's where people are really heading to consume content as the new players.
It's the pinnacle, isn't it, for an exec's career? I suppose, if you've been working at the BBC or you've been working, at any of the other national broadcasters, and you've got likes of Netflix or Disney or Apple who are there going, okay, well, it's almost double the salary. And the role that they have as well is so much power then, in terms of, right, okay, their commissioning might is also quite significant. So, hugely influential roles. It's certainly an interesting area.
It seems, but it's tough. I'm not saying terrestrial commissioning isn't tough as well. All of it's tough. You're very accountable in the Netflixes of this world because everything's so data driven. You've got nowhere to hide. If something doesn't deliver, why hasn't it delivered?
But talking about commissioners and producers, because we often see producers making the jump to a commissioner or commissioners leaving and setting up their own production companies. How do you know whether a successful producer will make a good commissioner?
I don't think you do. I guess the producers, I've seen so many people make that transition and really, really enjoy it. I guess the people who I've seen who struggled more in a commissioning role from being a producer are the people who get, really at heart amazing program makers. And so they want to get really deep into the nitty gritty of that show. And I think they find it harder to then helicopter and take a perspective across multiple shows and allow the execs from those indies to be the execs. And I think that's where you see there's a challenge sometimes. And, you often see people then leaving commissioning to go back into program making. I know a lot of people like that. Or they'll enjoy the commissioning process for a while, but if your heart lands program maker, you go back to it.
What about the main challenges that channels and streamers are facing in the market right now in their recruitment needs? What are the challenges they're coming up against? If
the streamers want to approach anybody, I'd say everyone is open to an approach from a streamer at the moment. That's for sure. They've got really stringent interview processes and long processes to go through, which can be quite challenging for the candidate, I think, more than anything. So I'd say for the streamers, it's a really open market to approach people. So I wouldn't say they've particularly got a challenge on recruitment at the moment. Now everyone's coming out of COVID, people are much more open to approaching. Development's a really interesting one, actually, because everybody's been working hell for leather in development over the last year. And actually, people are coming to the end of those cycles. So we've got a few development searches at the moment, and we're finding it a lot easier at the moment to engage with people because they're like, yeah, I've come up for air. Scripted, the development cycles are a lot longer. So you've really got to track people as to where they are on that. So there's no point, approaching somebody at 18 months into development cycle, they'll be 2 or 3 years. So hiring is all about timing. It's all about where that person is, what they're motivated by at that point in their life, whether it's working under a creative that can take them to the next level, whether it's financial, whether it's, more time to spend with family. So they want a more flexible culture. There's 6 categories really. It's just another conversation which people fall into. And that really shapes people's motivations for changing roles. And we tend to know all of those. When we talk to people, it's really driven by what people are motivated by.
What about BAME hiring quotas? Because that is something that, is at the forefront of hiring policy for many businesses in the UK, and it's about time as well. There's presumably some challenges with that as well when it comes to hiring at a senior level, because it almost feels like the industry within like the last 18 months, 2 years has gone from not really taking BAME issues seriously to putting in quotas and going, we need BAME candidates and executives at certain level across the industry. That must be a challenge for you and challenge for the industry as a whole when it comes to those hiring plans.
I mean, definitely, and we've heard a lot about that. From Indigo's perspective, diversity has always been part of our DNA, and by diversity, as well as Black, Asian, ethnic minority candidates, we also mean demographic, gender, across the board. It's those different voices. That's where we've really sat with our diversity policy. And we've ensured that all of our long lists have been representative, but it has definitely been a challenge. And actually, thinking back to sort of April, May this year, when we had space to really pause and think about this, we, like everybody, you started questioning how you work. Are you doing as much as you can for the industry? I think there was a really big time of reflection there. And I approached, from talking to one of my contacts, actually, I approached Simone Pennant, who runs TVC, to talk to her about it, to say, look, are we missing people? Why have we got such a small pool of Black, Asian, ethnic minorities in this headhunting pool of ours? We quickly were looking at her community, the people we know, and we came to the conclusion that that's fact. There just aren't as many people in that senior leadership pool. And then it was like, well, why not? And we started investigating the layer below, and a lot of those stories about glass ceilings, people not given the opportunities, are well documented. And off the back of that, Simone and I, with Remy Blumfield, I ended up partnering with them to create this breakthrough leadership program, which Remy and Simone had already initiated, and also brought in Fremantle, who sponsored the program for us, to really create a program which will elevate candidates so that they can move up in the industry. And it's this program is coaching, mentoring, and 12 months of modules across so many different topics. But effectively, will give people confidence in the skill sets and help people to have their own personal breakthrough in the industry. I mean, we're really excited. We launched it in December, and it's industry nominations. So we had the most fantastic response from all the creative leaders across the industry. We had over 400 nominations, which we went through quite a difficult process, actually, to get it down to 50 participants who kicked off last month on the program. Yeah. So we're really excited by that. And we hope that at least starts the process of bringing people through in the industry. And we'll run this every year as an ongoing commitment to coach, mentor. Yeah.
Oh, that's very good. Well, it's much needed, and the best of luck to you and everyone else involved in that program. I'm sure that'll be a big success.
Thank you.
What's the single piece of advice that you give most often to candidates and hirers? So the single piece of advice on both sides of the fence that you give to either party.
Preparation for interviews. And that goes both parties, because the client, as we came back to before, touched on about motivations. It's so important that they're positioning their business. That in the first interview, they're pitching to the candidate as much as the candidate's pitching to them. It's a real, first interview is a chemistry. It's whether you've had that connection. It's whether you're inspired. And culture is so important now. We're doing quite a lot of work with clients on that. And so we try and coach clients about how they should be presenting and engaging in the first interview. And likewise with candidates, really help people prepare and focus and think about what you want to highlight. People have got such long, great careers. It's like, okay, you've got X amount of time. Just make sure you have your stories that you want to share. So yeah, preparation for interviews.
So my last question, Jude, was, we're all coming out of lockdown. Things are looking very positive. You're at capacity when it comes to, hiring, advertising is coming back, money's coming back into the economy. So it's all looking hopefully positive as we come through to the summer. When people are coming back to work at offices. We're coming out of lockdown. How do you see the clients that you're working for? What's their expectation of people being based in the office? Is it they want people back in the office because it's the culture, or is it a 50-50 blend, which I think a lot of people are sort of starting to demand, or is it a case of like the likes of Google? It's like, no, it's fine. You can work from home for the next year. What are you seeing?
So we've been talking about this quite a lot, actually. I would say most people want to be back in the office in some form. Most of our clients are looking at bringing people in for maybe 3 days a week. And in that time, it's where people are having interactions, the development meetings, the creative discussions. And then when people are sort of heads down, literally with the headphones on, or doing work or watching brushes, whatever it might be, then they're doing that from home. So I feel it's feeling like people want people back in the office for that social, for that interaction. It's important, it's been incredibly difficult. Actually, that's a good point. It's been really difficult for people starting new jobs in COVID, because you've had none of that, just not even going out for a drink, but you've had none of that interaction, while you're making a coffee or a quick check-in. People have been sitting on their own in a flat starting a new job. We've been seeing how tricky that is. So people are, especially new starters, you need that interaction. And most clients are excited about getting people back, but making sure that everybody is safe is obviously paramount. And just a different way of working. We've all seen remote working can work. There's that trust element that people were terrified, no one's going to work well when they're at home. That's gone, hopefully. So I think it's going to. Hopefully, it'll benefit people who've had long commutes. Myself, hopefully that will make work-life balance. It's a weird word, but hopefully people have taken some of the things that have been positive about COVID, about spending more time with family, and can incorporate that into the next stage of our world, whatever that's going to look like. I'm positive. I always like to be positive. I know it's been a tough year for a lot of people, but hoping that it's going to be good. And also, TV industry has entertained people. We've really, the amazing creators and producers we've had have kept people going. The amount of content, my family, my mother, it's been her companion. It's been life-saving, actually, for some of the generations.
My Netflix to watch list is just so long now. It's ridiculous. I actually can't get through it.
What's your guilty pleasure been in lockdown?
The best thing that I saw recently, I think, was Queen's Gambit. I mean, I think that was an amazing piece of work. But there's, I've still got to get on to episode 3 of The Trip. I haven't seen that yet, which is which is definitely on the list. I'm going to watch that this weekend. Jude, thank you so much for coming on TellyCast. Really enjoyed talking to you about the recruitment industry and, what's happening in terms of senior executive hires. So thanks again. Hopefully you'll come on the show again and we can cover off some of those other areas that we mentioned.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me. Take care.
So my next guest on this week's show is David Cornwall, Managing Director at Scorpion TV. Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Justin. How are you doing?
Very well. I'm great. Where are you based, Scorpion TV?
Well, we're based in Farringdon, sort of Holborn, Midtown. I think it's fashionably called these days, in London. But mostly I'm working from the kitchen.
Oh, right. Yes, as we all are.
As we all are, yeah.
For those who don't know, tell us a little bit about Scorpion TV.
Well, we are a factual distributor. We're a boutique. We're 11 years old. We focus on current affairs, human interest, science, and wildlife with a sprinkling of arts, culture, travel and lifestyle thrown in.
Quite a niche in the factual area. Okay. Are you a pure play distributor, or do you get involved in production as well?
We get involved in production in the sense of we can try to raise co-production investment and pre-sales from broadcasters. We much prefer to focus on, the finished article and getting that out to buyers who sort of know us for that. 20 years in the business, I've kind of grown up in that traditional way. Having those great client relationships means that, we do tend to focus on that side of the business.
We had Bo from Off the Fence on the show last week, and he was talking about having both production and distribution side to the business has helped them through the pandemic. Now, if you're a more traditional distributor, how have things been for you?
This time last year, it was kind of, a panic, not just amongst distributors, but also, across the whole TV community. People didn't quite know what they were doing and how to proceed. I'm a big fan, as my staff and my clients will tell you, of the telephone. Love getting people on the phone, and that was not an option a few months ago. So certainly in the early part of last year, things were pretty quiet. We didn't know how to get hold of people. We didn't know what people were looking for, but it quickly became apparent that TV was one of those things that still needed to be fed. Broadcasters still needed, quality in their schedules. People were watching more TV at home. Slowly but surely, we found a way to work. Being pretty much a desk-based business, it wasn't too much of a wrench for us to transfer to working from the office to working from home. In fact, streamlined some of our operations, and we brought in better CRM, better rights management applications, so that we could work better from home. Buyers slowly came back online. The conferences did their virtual thing, and the business sort of shifted quite quickly, I would say, into this new mode. And the last sort of 6 months have seen an uptick. So it's been good.
What have you found that sold well, and perhaps what you expected to sell better than it has?
Everything that's quality is selling well. People want feel good content. What we're actually finding is that our feel bad content is selling. And what do I mean by feel bad? I mean the serious stuff, the current affairs. We've got a series called Great Decisions from PBS, which looks at current hot topics, things like the World Health Organization, China versus the US in terms of global influence, Brexit, that kind of thing. And, people are interested in that stuff. People want to know, perhaps even more about what's happening in the world around them. So, our current affairs stuff has been doing well. Anything that's quality is doing really well. Wildlife, you have to have wildlife, I think, in your catalogue as a distributor, because it's a surefire hit. We do have more light-hearted fare as well. We've got a doc from CBC Canada called The World's Biggest Family, about a man who's searching for his half siblings from the same sperm donor. So the light-hearted stuff, the serious stuff, as long as it's quality, buyers are interested.
We've seen lots of big streamers entering the market and doing very well over the last year, which obviously has a big impact in terms of content and content rights that are available for distributors. How have you noticed the industry changing over the past 12 months? I mean, is it getting more difficult for you to get great content to sell?
One of the talking points of the last 6 months has been the fact that we've been doing a lot more VOD deals, not with the big streamers, but with the proliferation of smaller networks. It's been good. I have to say, it's been a pleasant surprise. We've been making money on YouTube, which a couple of years ago we just wouldn't have thought possible. And it's actually, the money we're making on YouTube is actually competing with the license fees that we're getting from broadcasters. This is for library content. So, and it's for genre content. So it's World War II stuff. It's crime stuff. It's science. But, it's great that these films are getting a second life, and, the producers aren't elated because they'd forgotten that they'd made these films. They're in their back catalogue that far. And they're getting checks coming through on a regular basis. So that's been really, really good. It has been the proliferation of these VOD networks. In terms of acquiring content, it's always a battle. We are small. We cannot compete with the big boys in terms of laying down advances. So frankly, we don't try. But what we do offer, and what producers do seem to like, is this personal service. We're at the end of the phone. Your film means so much more to us because it really does put food on our table. If we do take on a film, because we don't take on that many, it has to work. We have to go to bat for it. We mainly work with independent producers, 1 or 2 man or woman bands, passionate about a subject, spend a couple of years making a film, and just want to see someone work hard for it. I think that producers understand that sometimes, despite your best efforts, a film doesn't set the market alight. As long as they can see that you're putting in the work, they're reasonably happy. Obviously, we want all our films to hit, but I think we all know that's not the reality. But
right, is that mainly in the UK or is that internationally? Where do your clients come from?
We get offered films from any country, Netherlands, Kenya, South Africa, Iran, all over, because there are so many film festivals, in fact, are dotted around the world that, that's where the producers tend to congregate. And so they can come from anywhere. But saying that, we do represent some BBC titles. We do represent films that have been on Channel 4, on PBS. Just so happens that these are films that the bigger guys either overlook or don't react to quick enough.
How do you search for your clients' content initially, or is it just you reading the trade mags, or is it, as you say, is it film festivals? Is presumably films and longer form content is the key content area for you as opposed to series?
Definitely, film festivals are in the mix. There's no shortage of supply. In fact, there are about 10,000 documentaries made every year, believe it or not. People come to us, we read the trades. The markets are still important for acquisitions, not only for selling. So MIP is good for meeting producers. Real Screen is good for meeting producers.
How have you found the virtual markets have worked for you? Have they had a real impact in terms of your sales for the year, or is it more around the one-to-one pitching that you've had on Zoom with broadcasters, etc.? Has that paid dividends?
I mean, for sure, we've missed the markets. They do give a shot in the arm to the industry. The impact they have in terms of the energy that they give to the industry every 6 months or so, can't really be replicated any other way. So we have missed that. There have been some benefits of the virtual festivals, and that's been able, to meet people from further afield. But on the whole, yes, I would say that, the concentration of the mind, the focus of, what are we selling? How many meetings have we got? Getting ready, getting prepared to go to battle, for want of a better expression. We have missed that. Business hasn't been too badly affected, but we're looking forward, like I say, to that input of that shot of energy.
So now it's time for Story of the Week, where David gets to choose the TV industry news story over the past 7 days that's caught his eye. David, what's your story of the week?
What did catch my eye was seeing that Channel 4 is going to launch the first sort of commercial channel on TikTok with advertisers and branding and so forth. And I thought, wow, that's really innovative and it's exciting. It's exciting, I think, hopefully for the production community, in terms of, new outlets, new avenues for production and new ways of producing. Yeah, I just thought that was really, really interesting. I did note that the Channel 4 hashtag has got about 78 million views on TikTok. So this is before, the channel's even launched. So it does seem as if young people are, using both traditional media and social media, engaging with both, which is really interesting.
Yeah, and this is obviously part of their Future 4 digital strategy. That obviously, a lot of Channel 4 content skews young anyway, but it makes a lot of sense for them to be looking at producing exclusive content from some of their, big series brands like Made in Chelsea or Hollyoaks, for example, Gogglebox, etc. It's a rich seam to mine. So that's it's a fascinating area and something that Channel 4 is really leaning hard into the digital strategy. So it's great to see.
I think it's going to be interesting to see what new comes out of it, what new productions, come out of it and what that can spawn in another direction. Obviously they've got their legacy brands, which they can exploit really well. But yeah, hopefully this will open some doors for some new creatives. I'm not the demographic. I think that's a polite way of saying it, for these apps. And I just don't really know enough about them. I wish I did. The other story is that Snapchat is trying to compete with TikTok. It's a bit older, and it's got this spotlight, part of their business. And I read that they're giving away $1 million every day, or a share of $1 million every day to their top creators. And they've already made, quite a few millionaires in the last few months. And so something's going on, clearly. And, being in telly, being in the creative media, I really should, get a handle on this side of the business and, got to sort of do my own homework.
Obviously, your focus area is factual, which skews a lot older, right? And it's more, as you said, more a traditional distribution model that you've got, and serving clients with content that is almost at the other end of the spectrum. And what we're seeing is, these huge changes, these new media platforms that are launching, almost every few months. It appears it's very difficult to keep on top of that, isn't it? And I think that these new models are being developed every week. We've got Quibi, who came and went.
I mean, we all saw that one, luckily, but that's about the only one that we could predict. But anyway, yeah, go on.
I think it'd be interesting to get somebody from Snapchat on the show, and maybe a rep from TikTok over the next few weeks, and have a chat with them and really understand what they're looking for producers and what are their new business models. And now it's time in the show where my guests get to nominate their hero of the week and who or what they're telling to get in the bin. David, who's your hero of the week?
My hero of the week and my villain of the week are actually the same thing. Yes, very Marvel superhero universe. And staying in the digital theme, it is the VOD networks. Woohoo!
Right.
Hero of the week in the sense that, as I said, we're doing deals with more and more of them. The revenues are increasing. It's competing with the linear networks for the library content. It's free money to some degree. That's great. I read somewhere that there are 78 VOD platforms in France alone, which is, insane. I don't know why France is such a hotbed of VOD, but, there you go. So, and yeah, I just want to big up the good guys, some of the aggregators and platforms that have been around for a while, regular, honest, report well, deliver, decent money, pleasure to work with. And they are out there, and they do really well by us, and hopefully they like us as well. So yes, hero of the week. And then there are the not so good guys. It is a wild west. It is early. There will be a shake-up and the cream will rise to the top. But while we wait, there are some unscrupulous types out there not offering good splits at all. And giving you some ridiculous offers with a straight face, which I guess is, which is fine if people accept it. But, I would encourage other distributors and producers not to accept anything, very unfavorable. They can be poor payers. Like I say, it is early. Some are going out of business. Some are going out of business, while still owing you money. So yeah, it is like I say, a wild west, and the bad guys, have to be watched carefully.
The lack of face-to-face contact for us all at markets. I mean, that's when you often get to chat with your peers and other businesses, and that's when the rumors start to go around about some of these bad guys, right? The unscrupulous businesses that are out there perhaps get called out more often when people are around together having a drink at the end of the day and saying, "Oh, you don't want to work with those guys. They're a nightmare. They didn't pay me," or whatever. But I suppose there's less of that discussion and chat now. We're all working from our kitchens.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Justin. It is about trust. At the end of the day, this business it is mainly about trust. And like you say, without that sort of face-to-face contact, look them in the eye, all that stuff, it's a lot harder. Yeah, it's a good point. It's a lot harder.
Yeah, well, there's another unexpected benefit of face-to-face industry events that we're all missing, and we've mentioned that a number of times on TellyCast. David, thank you so much for joining me this week. It's been really interesting to chat to you and hear about Scorpion TV, and I hope all those one women and one men bands out there, the smaller production companies, and yourself continue to thrive in these most difficult of times.
Cheers, mate.
Well, that brings us to the end of another week's show. As always, thanks for listening. Don't forget to rate and subscribe to TellyCast and share it with friends and colleagues. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter called TellyCast Plus. It's packed with interesting TV industry stories you may have missed and exclusive insight and opinion, including the secret producer, our intrepid, anonymous exec, reporting from the front line of TV production. It's all completely free. Just visit our website to sign up at telecast-podcast.com. You can also follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. TellyCast was edited by Ian Chambers and recorded in lockdown in London. Until next Thursday, as always, stay safe. To celebrate a year of TellyCast, we've teamed up with Workshare Consulting to launch the TellyCast Workshare Content Industry Monitor. Taking the pulse of the global business of TV, this exclusive regular survey will analyse your views to find out how the TV business feels about the key issues it faces today. So, we're asking all of our listeners, from producers to financiers, from distributors to networks, and everyone in between, to please take a few minutes to fill out our survey. We're asking about how confident you feel about your job or business, how you've been impacted by the lockdown both personally and professionally, how the industry leaders have performed, about virtual markets and events, and the return to a new normal working life and industry recovery. Just go to telecast-podcast.com/survey to complete it. It'll only take 10 minutes and you'll be helping take the temperature of the global TV industry right now. Plus, we'll send you a copy of the full results when we publish in April. Thanks a lot.